The fluorescent lights glared overhead with a merciless brightness, turning the sterile walls of the hospital delivery room into a place where time seemed suspended between dread and joy, where every sound, the persistent beeping of monitors, the shuffling footsteps of nurses, the whispered encouragements, became amplified to a level that was almost unbearable, and where the smell of antiseptic lingered so heavily in the air that Daniel found himself both reassured by its promise of cleanliness and unsettled by its cold impersonality. He stood at Emily's side, his hand clasped tightly around hers, his knuckles turning white with the force of his grip, not because she needed him to hold so tightly, but because he needed to anchor himself in the storm of emotions that roared inside him, a wild mixture of fear, awe, and a love so profound it felt as if it would split him open from the inside out. Emily lay on the hospital bed, her face slick with sweat, her body tense with the effort of bringing new life into the world. Her breaths came in ragged waves, shallow and deep all at once, her chest rising and falling with a rhythm that seemed to echo the monitor's steady beeping, and Daniel could see the immense courage in her eyes, even when they fluttered closed in exhaustion. The doctor's voice rose above the atmosphere of anticipation, calm but commanding, urging Emily to push, to give everything she had left, and Daniel bent low, whispering words of encouragement into her ear, words that felt inadequate compared to the monumental task she was undertaking, yet words that she clung to because they came from him, the man she had chosen to walk this path with. Minutes stretched like hours, every second a battle fought with pain and perseverance. And then, suddenly, as if the entire room exhaled together, there came the sharp, piercing cry of a newborn, the sound cutting through the sterile air with a purity that made Daniel's knees almost buckle with relief. Tears filled his eyes before he could stop them, blurring the sight of the tiny, wriggling form that the nurse lifted and placed gently onto Emily's chest, and the world seemed to collapse into that single miraculous moment, the warmth of their baby's skin, the faint cries that grew stronger with every breath, and the radiant, exhausted smile on Emily's face as she cradled their child against her. Daniel laughed through his tears, kissing Emily's damp forehead, whispering again and again, "We did it. We did it. He's here." Even though the words felt absurdly small compared to the immensity of what they had just accomplished. The room seemed to brighten, the machines less intimidating, the antiseptic smell less harsh, because in the presence of new life, everything else faded into insignificance. He looked at his son, and felt as though the universe had shifted on its axis, as though the man he had been before walking into this room was gone forever, replaced by someone new, someone heavier with responsibility, yet lighter with wonder. The doctors busied themselves with routine checks, the nurses murmuring softly as they recorded vital signs and cleaned the child. And Daniel, feeling an almost overwhelming sense of gratitude, excused himself for a moment, stepping out into the corridor to call his parents, his voice trembling with joy as he shared the news that their first grandchild had been born healthy and strong, the beginning of a new chapter for their family. His father's voice broke with emotion on the other end of the line. His mother cried tears of joy, and Daniel could feel the love of generations wrapping around him, like a blanket steadying him, even as he fought to process the magnitude of what had just happened. He allowed himself a moment to breathe in the quiet of the hallway, his body still thrumming with adrenaline, his heart racing with the realization that he was now a father, and then, filled with anticipation, he turned back toward the delivery room, eager to return to Emily and their son, eager to hold his family in his arms. But when he stepped through the door, expecting to find calm settling over the room, he instead walked into a storm of motion and urgency that made his breath catch in his throat. The doctor's voice was firm again, nurses moving quickly around the bed, instruments being passed, monitors spiking with new readings, and Emily's face contorted with fresh waves of pain. Confusion hit Daniel first. Hadn't the baby already been born? But before he could voice his questions, the doctor glanced up at him briefly, a flicker of controlled surprise in her eyes, and said the words that would forever reshape the memory of this day. "There is another one. She's having twins." The sentence crashed over Daniel like a tidal wave, his mind struggling to grasp the impossibility of it, the fact that throughout months of ultrasounds and preparations, through every whispered dream about nursery colors and names, no one had ever told them to expect more than one child. His eyes flew to Emily, who was too consumed by contractions to speak, her body trembling with exertion as she pushed again, and in that moment he realized that this day, which had already seemed monumental, was about to become even larger than he could have ever imagined. The room swelled with intensity again, the beeping louder, the commands sharper, the air electric with anticipation, and Daniel moved instinctively to Emily's side, his hand finding hers once more, his lips brushing against her temple as he whispered, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together." He could feel the strength in her grip, could see the fire in her eyes as she bore down, summoning reserves of courage that astonished him, even as he knew they had always been there. And then, as if the universe wanted to show them just how unpredictable and miraculous life could be, a second cry pierced the air. Higher, softer, but no less fierce than the first. And another child was lifted into the world, another tiny form wriggling with new life, another soul beginning its journey. Daniel's tears came harder this time because the shock made the miracle even sharper, because his heart now felt as though it had been split into two equal halves that somehow made him more whole than he had ever been. The nurse announced the weight and the gender, another boy, smaller than his brother but just as alive, just as determined, and Daniel could only laugh, a sound that was half disbelief and half the purest joy he had ever known. Emily, exhausted beyond words, smiled through her tears as both babies were placed near her, their cries intertwining like a strange and beautiful duet, and Daniel knew with absolute certainty that this was the moment their lives had truly begun, not just as parents, but as a family of four. Hours later, after the chaos had subsided, after the room had grown quiet and dim with the passage of night, Daniel sat in a chair by Emily's bed, one son cradled in each arm, their tiny breaths rising and falling against his chest in perfect rhythm. Emily dozed beside him, her face peaceful in sleep, and Daniel let the enormity of the day settle into him like a tide coming in slow but unstoppable. He thought of the man he had been when he walked into this hospital, nervous and unsteady, certain that he would leave with one child, certain that fatherhood would be monumental enough in itself. And now here he was, holding two sons, their unexpected presence a reminder that life rarely follows the path we chart for it, that its greatest gifts are often the ones we do not see coming. He whispered to them softly, promises of love and protection, of sleepless nights he would endure gladly, of dreams he would nurture, of laughter he would chase with them through the years ahead. He told them how brave their mother had been, how she had carried them and brought them into the world with a strength that defied words, how they were born not just into a family, but into a love that was vast and unbreakable. And as he sat there, surrounded by the steady hum of hospital machinery, by the faint glow of the corridor lights seeping under the door, by the two miracles sleeping in his arms, Daniel understood something profound, that sometimes life saves its greatest surprises for the moments when we think we have already reached the peak of our joy, that sometimes we leave to celebrate one baby, but return to find two.